The person with who I'm about to speak with comes from one of the greatest cultures on this fine planet of ours. Ever since Jack Weatherford's Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World and Dan Carlin's Wrath of the Khans, I have been deeply fascinated by pretty much everything Mongolian. And the person on this podcast today exhibits the perfect worldview to help us understand actually what is Mongolia, what it is to be Mongolian, and what is Mongolia's culture. Now, forgive me, Bolor, for this pronunciation, but the following is a conversation with Bolor Lkhaajav, and she is a researcher specialising in Mongolia, Northeast Asia, East Asia, and the Americas. Her research interests cover foreign policy, security, governance, economy, and social issues. Bolor's research and writing have been published by many, many amazing outlets, and she's a researcher and writer for The Diplomat. This podcast is about Mongolia. I think the second half of the conversation, specifically about culture, modernity, and alcoholism, is my personal favorite, but as well, we cover mining, Genghis Khan, horses, sovereign wealth funds, and all the rest that goes into making up a culture and an economy. Now, this podcast took me 5 hours to put together, but will only take you, how many? 5 seconds to review. So therefore, do the right thing and pump that good juice into the algorithm. That is achieved via swiping up your phone right now and then pumping into an app a 5-star nice review. Finally, you're all an absolute bunch of legends. And with no further ado, here is the great Mongolian, Bolor Lkhaajav. To start, I thought it would be nice to share with you something that a recipient of the Order of the Polar Star, Jack Weatherford, author of Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, said about you. I wrote to him and said, hey, I'm interviewing this person about Mongolia. Could you please advise me or give me some questions that you think would be interesting to say? And he responded, because he's just such a sweet, lovely man, he responded, I'm perhaps too starstruck to think of a question. Such a bright and courageous young Mongolian. I'm sure you'll do fine.
Wow. I'm very flattered. Jack Weatherford is, he's very popular and he's one of the leading scholars, enthusiasts of Mongolian culture, society, and history. He's very well respected. I think everybody in Mongolian studies know who he is. If you don't, then I'll be saying to them, you're not a Mongolian scholar, because he wrote so many books and his scholarship is very, very well respected. So I'm very honored. Thank you, Jack.
So even in the Mongolian language or your own study of your own history, and Genghis Khan, obviously, who's a Genghis Khan, there's a huge role in that. Jack Weatherford's work is still the authority that you go to. Doesn't matter that it's an American voice behind it.
I don't think so, because you have number of scholarly works or historical records that are written in multiple languages, right? So when I was growing up, I was taught by my own Mongolian language, but there's Chinese version, there's Persian version, and Jack Weatherford is just one of the person who took it all out in English language, right? And you can assume how many readership that reaches once you translate something that's only written in Mongolian language, for one. For two is it's also a perspective, right? Mongolians, we see Genghis Khan as different than foreigners might see him, whether it's a historical figure or somebody who created democracy or somebody just went around and killed a bunch of people and expanded his own clan. I was talking to Now, this happened in undergraduate studies, and the guy who I was talking to was in master's degrees, pursuing political science, and he was really into Mongolian history, not just Mongolian, but like Asian history. And the way he saw Genghis Khan was, even though he had such an ambition to unite the Mongols, he didn't have a manpower or a specific philosophy that united those people. That was his downfall, right? So I think a lot of people have their own perspectives of Genghis Khan, and Mongolians, obviously, even after so many thousands of years, we still worship him as if someone who's alive And a lot of people are like, why do you still talk about Genghis Khan? Goodness, so I think it's definitely, I think it's more for the perspective and as it should be.
You said that Mongolians see him very differently to the rest of the world. How is that?
Well, for one, Genghis Khan had taken over half the world, and you look at modern day Mongolia, where only 3.3 million population, we're landlocked between Russia and China. So if you look at it from comparing what he has accomplished to now, is in a way we have shrunk, right? This is one. For two, I think it has become more of a symbolic person to look up to. Like Genghis Khan did this way back when we didn't have technology or anything. So why can't we do this now, right? So it's a great symbolism for Mongolians to push forward, do something great. And yeah, it's also a business. You have Genghis Khan cups, you have Genghis Khan, what is it? Everything.
Vodka.
Yeah, vodka, exactly. They even have gold in it. You can see the gold or silver flowing in it. It's so pretty. You drink it, but you want to keep the bottle as a souvenir or some sort.
All right, so introduce us to Mongolia in your own words, but then we have together a list of points that I think make for a nice scorecard of a country.
Yeah. Well, Mongolia has been around for a while, whether you talk about the Mongolian people or the culture. As of today, Mongolia has reached 3.3 million population. We're not that big. And we have 21 provinces. Mongolia has been a democratic country since 1991, following the fall of the Soviet Union. One of the mistaken things that I have noticed when talking to people is that they see Mongolia as one of the 16 republics of the Soviet Union. Mongolia was never part of the Soviet Republic. We were always an independent country, although we had lots of influence by the Soviet Union. And yeah, so 70 years of Soviet history, strong relations with Soviet republics, strong relations with China. We've been to 2 world wars. They think World War just skipped Mongolia right over. Nope, we were in it. We fought the Japanese. I would say Mongolia is a modern country. You expect to go to Mongolia and you start seeing, they think they see just camels running around, sheep and yaks and horses, but that is not the case. You go to a countryside, obviously you'll see those, but you go to a capital city, you go to the different cities around provinces, you will see a modern society. I think these are the very, very basic ones. Then you go into different layers of the Mongolian society, you'll see all sorts of issues, right? Developmental issues, mining for one, corruption, or on the better side, you'll see educated youths. Mongolians are very educated. Yeah, and maybe if you ask me specific questions, I could give you a better answer. There's so many topics that we could cover.
Do you speak particularly good English for Mongolian?
I think so.
Okay.
What
No,
do you
I mean,
ask?
maybe I'm asking you to. You're too humble to say yes or no, but maybe compare it to another country in terms of English as a second language literacy.
Well, you may be surprised, but I actually failed English when I was first learning English. I failed English 101, and I didn't like it. I was like, you know what, this is not the language for me. Because, I grew up learning Mongolian and Mandarin Chinese. Mandarin Chinese is my second language because I went to a private school. And when I came to the States, I was like, you know what, this is not my language. So I kind of gave up English for like at least 6, 7 months. But then I realized, you know what, I have to learn this, right? But I think in terms of, it depends on who are you comparing it to. They are Mongolians that are fluent, but there are
Mm.
Mongolians that are really good at reading and writing, but they don't have the accent down.
Mm-hmm.
Or you compare my English to like somebody from, let's say, Chinese person who has a really strong Chinese accent, then obviously my English will be better.
And is Russian or Mandarin more common of a second language?
In Mongolia?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Which
Definitely.
one?
Well, actually, that's a great question because my parents' generations are all fluent in Russian. Like, my parents are fluent, their friends are fluent, the people that were born in 1960s and 70s are all fluent, and Mongolia has private institutions that both teach Russian and Chinese. So I think it's typical, but I think after 1997, the education system has really grown into different languages, right? So there are so many people who speak German, English, even French.
Really?
French is a hard language, yes.
Okay, so specific question. We'll tie in culture and mining here, because to answer what maybe the religion is of Mongolia, I was reading that there was one of the largest protests towards mining in Mongolia was the sort of old sacred pagan idea of not harming the land, right? You have to return to the land what you take from it. And obviously, mining, you can't do that. So, to answer the mining question with the cultural question, with the religious question, how it all fits together.
So Mongolians are very, what's the word? Animalistic, right? So you have the nomadic society that have lived on a certain land for centuries when without the development of really the urbanization or moving into the capital. So the lifestyle is dwelled in the mountains, the rivers, the animals within, right? The rocks. So I think when you bring a capitalism into and put it into practice, people don't like it. Whether it's from superstitious reason or they just don't want their lands to be destroyed. I'm going to give you one perfect example is let's say a 10 family of 200 people lived in a certain area and they have a beautiful nature. Their children grew up there, their parents themselves grew up there, their grandparents themselves grew up there, right? They have horses, yaks, and whatever. And one day, the local government comes and like, hey, you know what? We're gonna we have a license to dig your ground to see if there is mining or gold. And they're like, okay, well, what are you gonna do with it? And I'm paraphrasing, but these conversations are really happening before these companies are going into digging their grounds. So then the locals say, okay, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to give us, or how are you going to change your lifestyle? So the company may offer, well, you could move to the capital. We'll get you a job, we'll get you a house, we'll get you housing, whatever. And some people may say yes. Some people may say no, because we grew up here, generation. My grandparents lived here, and we don't want you to destroy the grounds because this is a sacred mountain. So one of the explanation is Mongolians are very close to the nature, so they don't like it. Second is they in order for somebody to come and like, you know what, you have to move to the city, you're changing somebody's life, you're changing somebody's history, and if they're not ready, they're not going to move. So I think that's one of the main reason for there's so much clashes because people are still very, very close to the nature itself, whichever they're located. Now, as for me, I grew up in the city, but I have access to the countrysides, right? Both of my grandparents had country like homes. So I'm thinking if I lose that access to countryside, I wouldn't like it, you know, because that's where my grandparents lived. That's where I grew up. Every summer I would go there to hang out. My grandma had cows. We had, vegetables growing in there. So because I am looking at it from a Mongolian perspective, Mongolian person's perspective who have lived in both places I can kind of understand why they don't want to, but at the same time, I also understand what needs to be done for economically, right? If 200 person is sitting on a gold mine that could develop the country's economy, what do you think the government's going to do, right? So these are the questions for policymakers. What do you do? What do you have to do so that these people are happy, at the same time they gain something from removing themselves from their beloved lands? Yeah.
I mean, what you're describing is sort of the story and complaints of mining all over the world, right? That
Yes.
it's not a problem unique to Mongolia. Is it maybe the case that is Mongolia sort of late to modernity? That these conversations are happening, say, more now than they maybe were back in, I don't know, the 60s, 70s, 80s for other countries?
Well, so the mining exploration started around 1970s, right? But it didn't really exponentially grow until like 2000s. That's when the licenses really start going crazy, like all the provinces, right? So people were like really focused on into mining business. That was like you should go to mining. In terms of modernization, I think the locals didn't know what they were sitting on until the licenses really started giving opportunity for exploration companies to go in and really find out what was under it, either it's copper or zinc or whatever. You may say Mongolia is a little behind because you look at Latin America and Africa could be the same thing except for diamonds, right? As you said, this is a repeated history. And in 2009, the governments were saying, we should learn from South America. We should learn from the experience of, Africa, what foreign companies, they come in and they take the gold and the population is still poor. So how can you prevent it? But if you look at it from current perspective, what has come to now with increasing protests, it doesn't seem like Mongolians have learned. At least the policymakers, they got what they got, and the people are upset. That's no secret now, is it?
Are people upset because they feel like the benefits of the mining isn't being redistributed properly? Like, is there a
Yeah.
problem of corruption in Mongolia, or is this just, I suppose, ill management? Like, you're just victims of the resource curse.
I don't like the word resource curse because I think somebody clever just came up with it and just kind of shove it to the countries with mining, like minerals. But I think they are certain issues, right? For one, allocation of resources. For one, you have large amount of investments coming into your country, and the government's job is to allocate these financial benefits, right? You open up your mining heaven. You have so much money and you're supposed to give it to the people, not by cash, right? You're supposed to create a road, you're supposed to create an energy supply, you create a hospital, you create schools for the children, kindergarten, and not just the basic one. We live in 21st century. You could get high level of medical equipment versus you're building a cement house and just be like hire some people, right? For one. For two, it's also mismanagement, right? Mongolia hired so many foreign consulting firms, paid them so much money. I think at some point they could just maybe figure it out themselves. I've actually heard one of your episodes about Mackenzie, and I was like, oh my God, I think Mackenzie was in, but they left. They left. And for
Sounds right.
one, yeah, exactly. So there's definitely mismanagement, and on domestic part, there's this politics, okay? And I'm not blaming it on the population, but in a way, it makes sense in my head because there's only 3.3 million people. And when you have a businessman turns into a politician or vice versa, there's always somebody's going to be within that family who does mining or some sort of a business, right? So it's kind of like your brother did this, my sister did this type of thing, right? So then it becomes a larger political economic issue.
So like because of nepotism, it stays in the family, and the
Yeah, I
benefits
mean,
aren't necessarily.
I feel like at some point, nepotism, that's just the way it is, and like we have to manage it or something, you know?
Because you're right. I mean, 3.3 million people. You're pulling lots of copper and gold out of the ground. What else are the valuable minerals that you're getting?
Copper, zinc, coal. We have found some oil. I think Indian company is working with the Mongolian government to get some oil out. I think we have some uranium.
You're familiar with Norway, obviously, and the way that they responded to their oil windfall, their natural resource windfall. An American company front loaded all the costs, all the risk, discovered the well, discovered oil. And an interesting fact about that is there was just as much oil discovered on the Scottish side of that North Atlantic Sea as there was on the Norwegian side. Yet you look at the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund and the amount of ridiculous value that returns to its nation of 5 million people, so bigger than Mongolia, every single year. And in Scotland, the benefits were narrowly gained, and a handful of companies and then a bigger handful of people became extraordinarily wealthy. But the broad social benefit of a natural resource, which is sort of, depending how you think about it, I think that it's a percentage owned by whoever is part of that country, wasn't spread out that way. Australia is the same problem. Famously, we basically built China with coal and iron that came out of our ground. Yet it's not like we have this fabulous, sovereign wealth fund that we can show off because of it. A couple of companies became extraordinarily rich. So is this the case in Mongolia? Is there a way that there's a Norwegian model that can slip in there?
I think people have discussed borrowing Norwegian and Singapore and Switzerland models, development models. But if you look at the history, we're all different countries, right? I think that, like right now, Norway's renewable energy is amazing. They have such a clean water, and Mongolia we need clean water, right? So I think if you want to really adopt how other countries similar, like particularly what you said about small states, right? Small states are doing, there are so many things to adopt. And I think right now, the couple mining companies, and same thing with the oil industry, I know it's very new right now. Still, it's, state owned. I'm afraid that it may head towards the similar things that we have been experiencing with the two mining giants, Rio Tinto and Taun. Now, going back to what you said about learning, you can suggest so many, right, to a certain administration, and then that administration comes up with certain policy, and then they go through the parliament, it becomes a legal document, boom, election happens, that changes. Okay, that's the problem with Mongolia is every other government has their own agenda of how Mongolia should develop. So I don't know the details of Norwegian politics, but if they have a stable government, they obviously know what is more important. One. Two, one of the issue with Mongolian governments keep changing the path to develop, even with you have so much opportunity to learn, right? Mackenzie is just one, but Norway, you learn from Australia, you learn from Central America.
And you're talking about Mongolian businesses that absorb this knowledge and then use it locally. And you don't think that's happening?
No, so there's like maybe 10 big companies and they make a decision and they get all the financial benefits. And what the trickle down effect is, they're not really trickling down. They're trickling down to maybe to minimum because the inequality is it's large, and the gap is increasing. You have you ever been to Mongolia before?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
I wish.
Well, you said you would, right?
Oh, fuck yeah. First chance I get, I'll go.
So the inequality is so visible in one's eye. It's not fair, right? You talk about like shanty towns, right? Favelas. Like you go to Brazil and you have favelas.
In
Mongolia has,
Mongolia.
well, I'm calling it favela because it's basically similar
But it's a
districts.
shanty town. They
It's
live
a
off the
shanty
grid.
town. Yes, they're off the
Cash
grids.
society.
They don't have a proper sewage system, and then you have the rich people have their own backyards and a couple houses. They're away from their pollution. So the inequality is increasing. It doesn't matter how many coal you sell. You have to have this system. And I think one of the reason is we keep flip-flopping between capitalism and socialist welfare states. And I know you had a question about this, which I hope that we'll get into in depth. I think you keep flip-flopping, and as developments are happening, you change the path, and then that's just kind of like two steps back. I feel like last 30 years we have flip-flopped so many times. You didn't get the investment, even you got the investment, you got corrupted. Like I said, 10 companies. And the people are still poor. They're still very, very poor.
There's a book called Trillion Dollar Baby. The author was a guest on the podcast, an Australian called Paul Cleary. And in that, he basically, I think at least, explains why Norway managed to end up in the position that they're in. And it's such a fascinating way to look at things, especially when you compare it to how Australia has managed it. And now we're going all right, but we could have done a lot better. But then many other countries as examples. And a really curious detail of it was that the Norwegians acted extremely selfishly to the international companies that came in. So, for example, I think it was Phillips Petroleum. They front-loaded so much risk and money to find this well. Dutch Shell, front-loaded shitloads of money as well to find more wells and get rights to it. And once they did find it, Norway turned around and said, cheers, thanks for that. You're not going to go home empty-handed, but we're going to absorb the absolute majority of the upside here. And if you don't like it, you can go home. And so what they did then after that was, just because it's such a small population, right? I don't know what they were at the time. They're 5 million now, and it was all basically isolated around Stavanger, this tiny little town on the coast. They re-educated. They changed, they completely pivoted the direction of their universities. They brought in all these Iraqi and Iranian petroleum specialists, and all of a sudden Norway now these days is turning out the greatest geophysicists, the greatest mining engineers, and so forth. So they pivoted to get the education of their own people so they could actually do it themselves. They hired all the guys out from the country, gave them really well-paying jobs to actually do the hard work on the oil rigs and so forth. They built their own shipping lines, and it's just this incredible example of how a tiny economy that is all homogeneously working together, which it feels like the Mongolian does as well, but this is me just speaking with absolutely no knowledge at all, but just that it's a small enough economy with enough of a cultural homogeneity. I believe Mongolia is one of the hardest countries in the world to actually immigrate to get a passport in, right? You really hold on to what it is to be a Mongolian. I don't think Jack Weatherford's gotten a Mongolian passport, for example, and he won the highest order that a foreigner can get. So
Sorry,
you have
Jack.
that cultural homogeneity like Norway. You've got the tiny population. You've got all the natural resources. It just feels like there is something there. There's potential. Like the ship hasn't sailed. It's not too late.
Well, for one, they're Vikings, okay? And for two, I noticed that you said the Norwegians were being selfishly, but what's behind being selfish is they're not insecure. They're not
Okay.
vulnerable, right? They have a coast. They invaded everywhere, right? Mongolians invaded everywhere, but we don't have coast, right? So when it comes to that economic anything involving economy investment, Mongolia is insecure. Okay, we don't have a coast. We're landlocked between Russia and China. Even our third neighbor foreign policy that could really open the gate for our economy, it still depended on the two neighbors, right? So that makes it, I think, insecure. So in order for Mongolia to be selfish, you have to be smart. You can't say no
Like
to the wrong
extremely
people.
diplomatic.
Yeah, you have to be extremely diplomatic. You want to have all the cards on the table to see who's out there. You can't kick them all out, but you can have them all. So it's very difficult for Mongolia, especially when it comes to investment. There was a time when everybody was interested in Mongolia, but because of our legal system, as I said earlier, it's very complicated. It's not as simple as Singapore or as other really, really highly developed countries, or like city states are developed. So I think one of the issues is very insecure, and I think Mongolia knows its vulnerability, but that's also the advantage because we know our vulnerability, your eyes are open. You know you're not being closed-minded. You're seeking for every opportunity to develop. You're looking for every diplomatic bilateral relations to, I don't want to say use it towards your development, but you're always looking for something more than just more than just the diplomatic relations. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a perfect example of why they are different to Norway. Norway's safe up there in Scandinavia.
It's beautiful. I'd love to go to
Yeah,
University of Oslo. I've been Googling University of Oslo for years, and I even thought about maybe I'll do my PhD there. Just travel around Norway and see a
you
Viking
got to
or
go.
something. I don't
I think
know.
I haven't been to Mongolia yet or Kyrgyzstan or any of these fantastic places, but so far in my life, I think Norway, you can make an objective argument that it is the most stunningly beautiful country in the entire world. The fjords is actually something else. You got
Hmm.
sheer cliffs that fall into some sort of green hill that rolls into a deep water that then comes back up the other side with snow on the top, and you can hike it, and everything's nice and it's so safe, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
ridiculously nice.
Yeah, I'd
All
love
right,
to
so
go
let's
someday. Yeah.
let's speak more broadly about the culture, but away from mining. So there's a fella, Tim Cope, an Australian, who rode his horse. He bought a couple of horses, rode it across Mongolia. Um, Charlie Walker walked across Mongolia. There are so many great stories of, at least in my opinion, great stories of adventurers and explorers and even journalists sort of doing these super romantic, sweeping journeys across Mongolia. And you get the sense that it's almost still nomadic. How much truth is there to that, or is it just a hyper romanticization of what maybe Mongolia once was?
When you go outside the city, you're free, you know? Okay, I'm going to give you an example. So in the States, if I want to camp, I have to book advanced. I have to book like a little corner and tell them how many cars I have, and then I have to pay for the car to, like, how many nights I'm staying, $20, $30, whatever. And I can't go anywhere, right? So in a way, I feel like it's not free here, It's free, but then it's not. You go to Mongolia, obviously with language difficulties, you need a translator. But if you have a great horse and you want to go left and right, east, west, you're free. I think when you come from such a capitalistic society where you have to pay for everything and everything is so privatized, you go to Mongolia and you're shocked because you pay the translator, you pay the driver, you get your horse, and if you know how to ride a horse, you just go ahead, right? You want to camp here, you can camp whenever. So in a way, it's a shock for the people that are coming in from such a I don't want to say this, but kind of like a money sucking society.
Mm.
But it's really free. It's really, really free. So I don't think The only thing that they may be romanticizing is maybe it's the how open it is, right? You have the blue sky and there's nothing there, and below it's just mountains or just plain fields. And where you see that only in paintings, and when you see that much open space where there's nothing in it, it just looks like looks like a magic, you know. Especially if you live in New York or you come from Hong Kong. I know there's a lot of Chinese visitors. No, really.
You can't
There's
compare it
no
to Hong
space.
Kong.
Well, Hong Kong's horrible. There's no space. They
Yeah,
don't
it's
move horizontally. They're done. So they start building up. You know, how tall can you go? So Mongolia is flat, right? There's nothing there. So I think that's one of the things that people are like, oh my God, this is really the place to be. You can breathe, right? You have plenty of space. The son of a former U.S. ambassador, Jonathan Adelton's son, did a kind of like a car trip east to west. That was pretty amazing too. He went across all the famous places. He like camped, rode horses, met the
mm,
locals, ate whatever they ate. So I think a lot of the notes and the books that you have read or what they have told you is true. Yes, I would seriously say it's true. But there is also the horse culture, right? Everywhere you see, you have horses because in countryside, you need a transportation.
mm.
So horse is a transportation.
Talk about the horses more, because that's a huge detail in Genghis Khan making the modern world. I mean, that the horse was so much a part of society that it wasn't a pet, it was a companion, and they would provide meat, milk, transport,
Yeah,
everything. How much has the horse culture remained in Mongolia?
we love horses. I just I feel like throughout centuries since Genghis Khan, as you said, it's a companion. You know, it's not a pet. So we have a word saying you treat your horse. What is it like? The way you treat your horse is the way how your life is going to go, basically. Because as you said, do you take care of your car? Yes, right? Do you feed them oil? So, you have to take care of your transportation. But during winter, you have to eat the horse. I mean, you don't have to, but if you don't have any food or, some sort of a nutrition, then, the horse is also a, food. So horse is really, really well respected. In fact, you don't beat your horses. You
Mm.
actually give them the best food. You give them the best home. Um, we also There's also a horse stories from different provinces. I don't know if you want to hear.
Sure, lay it on me. You absolutely love horses, as you were saying off air.
I love horses. My grandfather had 20 something horses when I grew up. You're probably gonna laugh at me, but I'm not that great horse rider. Okay, I was always afraid because they were so big. But I know some people call Mongolian horses ponies because they're smaller. Like European horses are crazy big, right? Mongolian horses are a little smaller, but they have the capacity to do long distance, really, really long
Mm.
distance. And the story that I was going to tell you is um, so throughout Mongolia's history, different provinces, you have like civilizations and nomads, they all had horses. So we had some Robin Hood characters too. Okay. What they would do is the Mongolian Robin Hoods would steal horses from the rich people from the east or the west, vice versa. And then they would ride it all the way to the opposite side to give it to the poor. So the rich people had more horses. So they call these people, like, if I were to translate it, like Robin Hood. Okay. So this is one of the things that was like stealing horses. You're not really stealing. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who stole horses for their own purposes, but in a way, the poor didn't have many horses because, as you said, it's transportation, food, milk, everything. But the rich people had like 20, 30, maybe hundreds, thousands of horses. So stealing a couple was nothing, right?
Mm.
Yeah. And we have a history of war horses, which always brings tears to my eyes because there were a couple of horses that now I don't know when was this. Okay, you might have to do your own research for this. The Chinese have purchased, I don't know, like 2,000 something horses from Mongolia. And when they took the horses, they kind of closed their eyes so they don't know where they were going. And a couple weeks later, all the horses ran back. They didn't want to stay there. They ran back, they crossed the border, they all came back. And these are the stories that like it's so sad in a way like they didn't want to be there. Maybe the smell was different, maybe their grass didn't taste good. They just
They
wanted
didn't
the
like Chinese
Mongolian
people.
food. Huh? Yeah, or maybe they didn't like Chinese people, maybe they didn't like the way they talk or whatever. Maybe they weren't feeding them with whatever the Mongolian organic grass. So horse has been just really, really cultural animal for Mongolians. And you probably know, during Naadam and national holidays, you do horse racing. That's big in Mongolia too.
And isn't horse theft also big in Mongolia? Tim Cope, who's the Australian who rode his horses across, commented on, and this happened in Kazakhstan too, so maybe it's like a steppe culture thing, but constantly people would steal his horses and then just sort of return them to him and act like it's all in good sport. A horse owner should not let their horses be stolen.
Yeah. Well, they used to steal cow carriages too. I think they just needed a transportation, and they because most houses, not houses, most families would leave their horses outside, right? You have like I don't know what it's called. It's a line and you have like 4 or 5 horses. That means those horses are rideable. The ones in the
Mm.
cage, you can't ride them because you don't know if they're broken or trained. But the ones that are standing outside somebody's houses, you can ride them.
Hmm.
But I don't know about stealing them and then bringing them back. Maybe it's somebody that they know from the opposite side of the mountain, which is totally possible because like the Mongolians, they like certain spaces. They don't want to live too close, especially if you're in the countryside. You build your gur, you have your access to water. You always want to settle close to water, and you don't want to build your you know what I'm saying, gur, right? The yurt.
The tent.
The yurt, yeah, yeah. So you don't tent. It's not a tent. It's a yurt. It is definitely not a tent. So you want to find yourself a kind of like mountain, right? And then have water. So stealing horses, I think it's normal. I mean, I don't know if it's still a thing, but
And if you were to stroll the streets of Ulaanbaatar, how often would you just see horses about?
oh God, no, you're not in
They're
downtown.
not in the city at all.
No, they're not in the city anymore. But if you go outside, I'm pretty sure you would still see a couple cows and horses. But you're thinking about like a countryside where people have a bunch of horses.
Hmm.
It's not 1920s in London, black and white.
Well, the hopefully this transitions us a little bit into modernity, and maybe in your own lifetime how you've seen Mongolia change. Because there was a really interesting detail from Charlie Walker, who was one of these guys that rode a horse across Mongolia, which is that he would see often people using motorbikes to herd the animals rather than traditionally what would have been horses, which is a very clear sign of modernity, kind of killing, maybe slowly killing, but killing nonetheless, a type of culture. So that's just a little meander into how modernity may have influenced Mongolian culture and how you've seen it.
Hmm. Yeah. In many ways, I think modernity is inevitable. If you look at 1970s and 80s, that's what you're talking about, where people would herd their animals with motorcycle, because obviously you're exposed to different transportation systems and you want to use it versus horse. In my lifetime, I have seen transformation in the capital and in the countryside. When I grow up, I would take the train from UB, which is the capital, Ulaanbaatar, to the countryside, and my grandma or somebody from the neighborhood will pick me up in a cow carriage. It's simple. You have one cow, you hop on it, and I was always afraid because I would be imagining like wolves or something coming out and just gonna like eat me alive, right? And there, no, really, there were times like there was like only two or three trains that goes into the capital after 9 p.m. It was like 12, and then it was like 4. If you take the 4 a.m. one, the cow will be just waiting for you outside, and obviously there's somebody, and I would hear wolf howling, and I'd be like, oh my god, this is how I die, right? That has changed. Okay, there are no cow carriages in my grandparents' property now. There are no horses. Everyone has a little Toyota or whatever they use. Their motorcycle. If you can't afford a car, then motorcycle is the way to go. But you don't see horses anymore. You don't see cow carriages. I'd love to sit on a cow carriage again. And actually, a family of mine told me that the ride was only 20 minutes. And I swear it was like the longest ride ever. And now that I think, I was just small and I was just really, really scared. Right? So when, as you mentioned, Charlie Walker's during time, I think modernization was coming in, whether it was transportation, whether Mongolians are starting to like really go out, they started to really, really travel. So when they come back, they bring those knowledges, they bring new ideas, right? Now, 1990s, I have witnessed how Korean pop culture and Japanese and Chinese pop culture was coming into Mongolia. Okay, I was born in 1988, so when I was a teenager, I was in love with Korean actors and actresses. I'm like, okay, this is like the cutest guy I have ever seen. And we were like bombarded. Before then, it was Russian. We had French telemovies. We even had Spanish soap operas, which was really interesting. I don't even know how
Wow.
it got there. Okay, but this is during 1990s. I was probably 8 or 9, you know.
Watching
So
telenovelas.
watching exactly telenovelas, and then once I was exposed to Spanish language, that guy's name was Miguel Angel, not Michelangelo or something. To my ears, we're all like same. Then I realized, oh my God, Michelangelo is somebody totally different. So modernization came through Mongolia like all different ways. TV, people started traveling, then you start seeing more foreigners were interested in traveling, doing research in Mongolia. As you know, since I was much younger, so I didn't know what they were doing, but I have accompanied a couple of, I think they were German and French couple people to the countryside. I was just kind of like, just playing, but one of my family member was a translator, so she did all the work. So I just hopped on the car and traveled around the country. I'm assuming that they were researchers like anthropology or some sort. And then 2000s, by 2000s, Mongolia was already modern, I would say. People knew about Mongolia businesses, even the foods came, the foods, like restaurants, you would have so many different foreign restaurants, like Mexican tacos and whatnot. So I think all those things are modernization. And
Mm.
a lot of the people that who went abroad brought back lots of knowledge and ideas, and modernization just, I think I don't think it ever stops. It just kind of changes. It continues. Do you know what I mean?
But to try and reconnect with one of the first points you made, is it still the case that Mongolia has a particular fierceness in holding on to their old nomadic horse loving culture? for example, despite all this modernity, is it still the case that you could buy a horse, ride it for a couple of days in any direction, and maybe not cross a fence, camp wherever you like? Is that type of idyllic freedom still possible in modern 2023 Mongolia?
It's still possible. You just have to know where you're going. You won't find a horse rental place in the capital. You have to leave the capital where all the financial center, where all the younger professionals are working. But if you're looking for a nomadic society, you're looking for the stuff that what I just said to be really free, it's still out there. It's definitely still out there. What modernization has changed, the countryside lifestyle that I'm bringing up is perhaps telephone communication. Everyone has an iPhone. You may see people wearing Adidas, Louis Vuitton, maybe Chanel. Those type of things are modernized. But if you look at the lifestyle of the countryside folks, they tend to hold on to traditions more than people in the capital.
Right.
You're too busy stuck in traffic, worried about the air pollution. Why would you care about horse riding? Do you know what I'm saying? Right? And then summer happens. Everyone wants to go out to the countryside. That's when families get together. You rent a horse. You go visit your extended families, and you camp out. You ride your horses. But to get to the bottom of your question do modernization change what Mongolians are trying to hold on to? It's very difficult, right? I'm going to give you an example. 2019, I did a research with our French colleagues on cairn. You know cairn?
No.
Right? Okay, so it's kind of like a bunch of sticks and rocks. You build like a rock, right? You go to cairn. It's a bunch of rocks and sticks, everything, and you create like a triangle, right? So you drive around.
For what purpose?
So the purpose is to, way back when, they used it as kind of like a meeting spot, or you leave a message there for somebody to pick up, or it serves as a border, right? Border between Mongolia and China or Russia,
cool.
or whatever. So what happened is we have used this cairn system for decades, and now people use it as kind of like a prayer location, right? You pray to your god or the Mongolian Buddhist or whatever, and you leave items for thanking them. Or there are cases where, let's say somebody broke their legs and they leave their crutches saying, "I have healed, thank you." Okay, so over time, these items clutters this cultural thing that Mongolians used to take care of. As you modernize, you need to find a way to take care of those things. Okay, let's see, you come to Mongolia and you're gonna be like, "Oh, Bolor was talking about this," and then you see all these garbages are cluttered and it's stinky. You wonder, why do they not take care of these if these are cultural items, right? You can't help but to wonder, and not just because you're foreigner, Mongolians too. So the question is, who's responsible for it? Am I responsible because I'm using it, or the local government's responsible because it's built on their jurisdiction, or the the centralized government is responsible? The administration is responsible. So as you modernize, the way in which you take care of your cultural items has to change too. If you're not using the cairn, that's fine. If you're not using it, it's just going to be a bunch of rocks. If you're using it, you have to take care of it. So the environmental issue is a very, very big aspect of, because when we first started our podcast, you asked about how come Mongolians are so close to nature, fighting against mining. Is if you're that close to the nature and take care of the environment, then take care of it. That's the way you should protect your cultural heritage sites. And I was going to say UNESCO has been very active in protecting, Mongolian heritage sites too.
On the dual experience of your upbringing and modernity, Mongolia's changing modernity, can you talk about the role that alcoholism plays in Mongolia? Because it's famously a massive problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, in your own life, anecdotally, but then as well, what the broader statistics say.
So alcohol has always been around, right? It's not just Mongolia, but worldwide. But the usage and how and when to use differ. So Mongolia has all different sorts of alcohol. We even have our like own Mongolian alcohol that made from milk, right? So traditionally, way back when actual vodka weren't introduced, that's where they used to drink. It's basically milk
Fermented
alcohol.
milk.
Fermented milk. I've tried
Sounds
it.
appetizing. What's it taste like?
Well, it's very sour, and you drink it, you don't feel like you're drinking, and then you're out.
Because
It's
it's
very
what
sour.
super high percentage.
Yeah, but when you drink it, it definitely doesn't taste like you're drinking vodka. And as Mongolia modernized, people start bringing in different types of alcohol, products, and obviously vodka is very one of them. You have Russia there, and Russians they drink a lot. I think 1970s and 80s were definitely influenced by Mongolians going to Eastern Europe. So the drinking culture is similar to Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union. But I think after 1990s, and I think I read this somewhere that unemployment really, really influenced the Mongolians drinking more because there was no job and they had nothing to do, especially during winter. What do? You can't go out. It's minus 40 degrees. You don't have a job. And it's horrible that
Not good.
even if you're poor, people won't give you money to buy food, but you can always find alcohol, some sort of vodka or some kind of, alcoholic beverages. And after Mongolia's democratization, when people really went abroad and really tasted what's out there, then they started importing different items, wines, different types of beers, famous German beers, So I think that become more of a consumer, diverse consumers. Now, the numbers, I actually did a little bit of research, and Mongolians drink less than Canadians do, and actually, I
Really?
thought,
Per
Canada is
capita?
pretty close too. What's that?
Per capita, really?
Yes, there is a
Oh, that's
number, and
surprising.
Russians still drink more. I have a note here. Let me quickly pull it up. That's why I was surprised, and I know there's a stereotypes saying that Mongolians drink a lot, but the
Mm.
Canadians looks like they drink more than us. But there was a guy who went to Mongolia, and I don't know if you've read it already, but this guy wrote a book that he actually wrote about how Mongolian alcoholism has led to so many, domestic issues, and
Oh, really?
that's
No,
really
never heard of
unfortunate.
it.
Yeah, this American guy went to Mongolia to teach English or something, and wrong place, wrong time, got bullied by a couple of drunkies in the bar, and got beaten up really, really bad. So obviously his perspective changed because of that one bad event.
Mhm.
Um, but
But
you could, yes, go ahead.
it sounds like you're suggesting that perhaps alcoholism isn't as much of a plague to the culture and society as the stereotype might suggest.
No, I'm not saying that. I haven't gotten there yet. Actually, Mongolians do drink a lot. I was just saying, looking at the numbers, but from my
Okay, okay.
perspective, from the environment where I grew up, everyone drank. My parents, like friends drank. My extended relative drank, but it wasn't to the point where they like pass out. It was more like for social drinking. So to my eyes, there's two different types of drinking. You can drink socially, or you drink until you pass out and you do stupid shit, right? So I didn't
Mm.
grow up in the environment where people would do stupid shit, but I have heard plenty of stories that leads to domestic violence. And I remember during 1990s there was a advertisement. It was kind of like anti-alcohol advocacy group that created a video, like 6 seconds. This mother is standing with her daughter by the refrigerator, and then the father just comes in really, really drunk, and then the girl just shivers. Me
Mm.
watching that, I'm like, oh my God, what is this, right? So it was during 1990s where alcoholism has exploded. I think it was because of the unemployment. There was nothing to do. And I think it was the government's approach to like, do not drink because you're destroying your children's life. You're destroying your, family lives. Um, the another issue that Mongolians are, known for drinking stereotype and its relation to vodka is I would say it's different from generation to generation, right? So my generation would drink socially, but again, there are people that who just drink until they don't know what the heck is happening. The generation that are younger than I am, so like Generation Z, for example, they consume alcohol, but they consume different things. They don't drink vodka. They drink cocktails, they drink expensive wines, the guys drink beer. So I think it's going back to your modernization question, that generation is changed by what kind of products are coming into Mongolia. In 70s and 80s, everyone was drinking vodka.
Mm.
Right now, ladies are more interested in drinking French wine, and the guys are drinking, German beers. So, but yeah, people need to stop drinking too much. If this is the message that I want to, if I want to send by taking this opportunity, it's not good for you,
Yeah.
especially for women. You can tell when a person drinks so much, their skin, you don't glow, you lose that glow. Just don't drink.
I mean, from what you're describing, though, you could have easily have supplemented in, Australia, even Sweden, as alcohol is a problem. Some people maybe drink too much. Some people just drink socially. You drink. What you're drinking is determined by your income. Sure, but it just feels like, and again, this is me, someone who's never traveled there, only heard and only heard things, so it's a completely unqualified opinion or a suggestion to make. But all the stories of these great adventurers and travelers who I really admire, who have gone through there, comment on how it's not just it's not just a bottle of wine at a party. It's 6 a.m. and you just got into a taxi and the driver is completely fucked and he's got a half empty bottle of Genghis Khan vodka next to him. Or, you're brought into a yurt late at night and these people are very hospitable and very nice to you, but all of a sudden everyone's passed out because they all got so hammered and there was some sort of domestic violence involved. Now, obviously, there's all individual cases, but just the real problem of how alcohol really plagues a society, one gets the sense that in the steppe countries, Russia included, it's more severe than it might be in, say, Northern Europe or Australia or Canada, for
Yeah,
instance.
yeah. Well, I have heard similar stories, and I think it depends on what you do, what's your job, what's your social status. If you're depressed and you don't have a life goal or something, you're more likely to take a depressant, because alcohol is a depressant. It does not make you happy. And at some point, if you don't stop, it makes you act on it, you know? And I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you, but it is true. And I think the government is trying to change. They're trying to change it by, I think, one of the first day of the month or the last day of the month is you can't sell alcohol. But
Okay, nice.
well, no, because for some reason, like when you tell people don't do this, then they start doing it more. I've heard that
Mm,
that's like the day where everybody's partying just because
yeah.
it's kind of like the
Out of
prohibition,
protest.
right?
Yeah.
prohibition. They're out of protest, or their body just like, you know what, you're gonna tell me what to do, then hello, I'm gonna drink it.
Mm.
For one. For two is on alcoholism. The Now I know we may be starting to talk about something else, but the social pressure is also another thing that connects to consumption of alcohol.
Social pressure
Is
to
if
drink.
you're not happy, social pressure to drink, if you're not
Mm.
happy and you go out to do something, and if you don't have other positive activities and you have so many bars, what are you going to do?
Mm.
You're going to go to a bar. Can you go to a bar without drinking? So
No,
all
you're
these
gonna
issues are
booze.
kind of connected at the same time. What's that?
I was saying no, you're gonna booze. You're gonna drink.
Yeah, so yes, so you drink, and Mongolia has so many bars, so many fun places, but it's not really healthy. And when you have a stressed society that is suffocated in air pollution or whatever their individual problems are, you're going down.
Mm.
Yeah.
What about drugs? So, is there a problem of methamphetamines, or do a lot of people smoke? Is there a stigma around drugs socially? It'd be interesting to know what the other side is of sort of substance abuse, apart from alcohol.
hmm So Mongolia is really strict on drugs, including marijuana. Um, if you get caught, you will go to jail, and most likely they will. I don't know the level of interrogation, but they will ask you to who sold you that, because they want to
Mm.
find out who's supplying and who's selling. But at the same time, it's not as open as, for example, the U.S. U.S. states are like liberalized. I don't
Mm.
see that happening in Mongolia for a while. There is a there's a drug problem that most likely comes in from Russia and China, but these are the numbers that I think Mongolia keeps it really under low control. So one of the reasons is the more exposed you are, the more exposed your population is, given the depressive modes, or even alcohol, the consumption of alcohol could be applied to consumption of other drugs. So as
Mm-hmm.
a preventative measurement, I think you don't talk about it. You
Okay.
don't release the numbers, but I do know marijuana is really illegal, and if you get caught, then most likely you're going to go to jail. It will
Okay,
definitely
interesting.
not
And
be legalized for a while.
but that's also maybe a reflection of the Mongolian culture. Like, is there even a demand for drugs? Do people want them?
No,
No.
no,
Yeah.
I
See,
don't
that's
think
really
so. Yeah.
I find these little details so extremely fascinating when looking at different cultures, different countries, trying to figure them out. Um, Forgive me for the very granular sort of questions. I hope there is still a broad interest from the audience here, but there is another interesting detail which I would love to hear you speak on in the Mongolian culture, and that is the dynamic of men versus women. So I'll just say
Mm.
what the stereotype is that it's an extremely masculine culture, but it's also one that is quite matriarchal in the sense that there's the famous Mongol queens, the Khans, although maybe didn't treat no, it's not even important to say, but the Khans had sort of deep respect for the women in the community, right? And would give them lots of responsibility, which a lot of other cultures weren't doing at the time. So, broad question, modern Mongolia, in your own life, your own experience, what is the role of men, the role of women? How has it changed?
There's so many details, but from a broader perspective, there's definitely social roles that men and women have in the Mongolian society. I don't know if it's directly from the result of the Soviet system, whatnot, but during Soviet era, there's a schooling, like the guys would go to carpentry school. You want to know how to fix a car, build a chair, whereas women know how to sew and cook, right? I don't know if it's cook for your husband or cook for your children, but you have to have these basic skills. Now, if you look at it from modern perspective, you might say this is gender inequality because you're not giving the woman opportunity. What if the woman wanted to become carpenter and this guy wanted to become a chef? These skills are like kind of set in a two system and you just took away the opportunity. But this is from modern perspective, right? But I think over time, the idea was men was always head of the household, right? From culturally, you come into a Mongolian household, the husband is sitting on the top, the children are sitting below, and the husband never sits, the lowest table. So the wife would sit next to. And I think it's also the same with like older families, right? So the father would sit, the son would sit, and then the uncles, and then it's the wives. So visually, I think those things are still very, very alive. But at the same time, you look at divorce rates, head of households, more women are educated than Mongolian men currently. They are, even though men want to be the head of the household, women are leading lots of the families. Single moms, there's like an era of really, really bad high divorce rate. So the mothers usually take the children. So, single mom households is really normal in Mongolian society today. So I think the gender roles have definitely switched. The women are taking more roles. They're the carpenter, but they're also the chef, right? Traditionally, there are so many words that in a way degrade Mongolian, not just Mongolian, but just woman, right? I don't know if you heard, but there's oh, your knowledge is shorter than your hair, or I am doing direct translation, okay? So
I've
these
never heard that
traditional,
one.
you have.
No, I haven't.
Okay, yeah. So, the dad or the grandfather would say like, "Oh, it's better for you to, be quiet than open your mouth," or those type of things. We have like traditional sayings. So I think back then the idea of the men of the household was much more greater. I think modern days a woman would just say, "Shut up, you're not doing anything." I think we have more voice for one. For two, and I think Mongolia is changing, so much as the world, women are taking more higher roles, they have much more voice, and they know that they're doing most of the roles in the household. So the roles have definitely changed. For domestic violence, there's definitely men are, showing domestic violence more towards the woman, whether out of hate or men's ego. It could be very much a thing. They have the idea of I'm the man of the household, but they're not contributing enough, so they get upset and they drink, and here's domestic violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I mean, is there any sympathy for you for maybe the men in Mongolian society who aren't as educated as the women and aren't necessarily presented with the same job opportunities that their own fathers and grandfathers had? And so there is this, sense of desperation, where obviously the ego is intact and you maybe feel impotent as a man who maybe cannot be the provider who his entire life, his culture has told him that he should be. And that his wife, someone who he maybe loved at one stage, he starts to resent because she's actually much better than him. She brings in the money, she takes care of the kids, and you're just a guy who drinks and grows more and more resentful. I don't think it's, so do you have sympathy for this situation? Does that situation even make sense? Are there jobs for the men?
Yes, I mean, I personally think that there should be more service for men. I don't believe that women and men should always be treated equally because they're different. We're naturally different, and if you keep paying more attention to the mom and the children, the father is also a character too. And if you don't have a social service or some sort of a father support, you're killing half of your population basically, because what are you without a full family? You have all sorts of broken little pieces, right? So the way I see this is family is the very, very strong fabric of a whole society, right? And I I have been mentoring like undergraduate students for about 4 years now, and most of them are female students. And I wonder, I was like, where are the dudes? I want like male student
Mm.
come to me and tell me that I want to learn to write, I want to become a researcher, but for some reason, I've had 25, 30 students. 90% are girls. Now I don't know
So
if
where
it's
are
the
the
ambition.
men?
I don't know. Guys, where are you? So I don't know if the ambition is not there, or they're not interested in academia as much as
Could, could
girls,
it
I
also
think.
be that in what seems like a very sort of masculine culture, the very idea of higher academia or writing, or these maybe more feminine roles, even though that's not the case, but they might view that as being the case, is an explanation
Yes.
for why they're simply not there.
Yeah, maybe. But, going back to the word, going back to what you said about do I feel empathetic for the men? I really, really do, because they have a very important role in every society, so and education is just one of them. If Mongolian society sees men as drunkies and uglies and they can't do anything, we're going down as a society. No, really. I know
Is
you
that
and I are
how they're
laughing about it.
viewed in Mongolia? Drunkies
No,
and
I'm just
uglies?
saying, okay, well, if you're drinking and uglies, then you are drunkies and uglies, right? So at some point, the man needs to become men and do something. At the same
Mm,
time, you're not acting alone. The woman has to respect the man too, not necessarily as, head of the household, but as an individual.
mm,
It's a two-way street. This is not a one-way street, right?
yeah.
And as per education, I was going to add is that you're right. Major is definitely one. I may be in international relations. There's way more Mongolian women who wants to become diplomat and they want to do, but they are guys who are, doing in science, technology, high tech, computer science. So that could be one of the explanations. Yeah.
Mm. Maybe this I've just thought this, and it's not necessarily relating to Mongolia, but the idea of the man is supposed to be the maybe head of the house, the guy who brings in the money and takes care of everyone and makes sure everyone's safe, is pretty universal, right? Most cultures have behaved that way up until the last few generations. I perhaps live in the one country where that is a small exception, Sweden, northern Europe. Anyway, this same desperation, which is being manifested in Mongolia through more domestic violence, more alcoholism, it could also explain these like social internet phenomenons and the manosphere and the huge popularity of people like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate and stuff like that. The same motivations or the same reasons. It's just, yeah, like as an explanation for why they're so
Mm-hmm.
absurdly popular.
Yeah. So you don't agree with Jordan Peterson?
I used to be a huge Jordan Peterson guy. Loved him when he first jumped on the scene, speaking about shouldering a responsibility, doing hard things, being responsible to those hard things. Jungian psychology, thought it was fascinating. But I admit the last few years I found him pretty off-putting, just because he became an expert in absolutely everything, and started, I think, pandering a lot more to the audience that gave him a lot of respect and love, which are the same
Mm-hmm.
people that are themselves completely lost and stuck in a neurosis. And maybe that's what
Mm-hmm.
I think. Are you a big fan of him?
Well, I like psychology. I read everything, but when things go too extreme, I tend not to like it because you can't be extreme. you can't be one-sided. I feel like life is really about being open-minded, and then you just pick and choose.
Mm.
I there was time I read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules of Life, and I was like, okay, that's nice, but only if it applied to certain situations. Everybody's different,
Yeah.
right? So when you
Mm.
when you read a inspiration book, it's always, you don't have to take it. You learn it, you adapt it, and if you can't learn, then okay, well, nice book, thank you.
Yeah.
That's how I see about Jordan Peterson. Yeah, I don't like
Yeah.
extremism. I don't support it.
Yeah. I think he peaked. He peaked with that book.
Yeah, he definitely did.
Yeah, with that sort of self help stuff, I find as well just for it to be directly prescriptive is wrong. But as a map, like here are the options, but you're the person who has
Yes.
to decide how you're going to deal with it. Um, I think you can get a lot from there. But on the question of the male female dynamics in Mongolia, huge rising divorce rate, maybe more educated females, females performing better in the economy. Tie that in to the shocking Mongolian demographics in terms of low birth rates. What is the future looking like for Mongolia?
Well, we're at 3.3 right now. I think it has slowed down. And as with any society, the more birth rate you have, your economy and society should be able to handle those increases, right? One of the reasons that there were high divorce rate was because Mongolia was encouraging people to have more children during 2012, maybe 2009 ish. And what happened was there was a financial benefit, welfare state, okay? Said, hey, if you get married, you have more children, we'll give you this much money for monthly, okay? Kind of as like a social service, right? And when younger generation people, they start, having families and really started learning what having family is like, the divorce rate went up. They didn't care about the money anymore. Okay. And I think there goes the single moms, right? And as people get more educated, they don't want children right away. Especially what I said earlier, you have to choose your partner, right? And if the partner is not there, women, even men too, they're not just sitting still. They're going to school, they're looking for jobs, they're doing something for their own life. And if the partner doesn't come up, you have different, right? We have more female than men now because the woman doesn't want to get married to a certain undereducated or doesn't have certain things established. Now, you
Mm.
look at an 18-year-old, you don't expect him to have a car or a full-time job. But if you're looking at 25-year-old, you better have a job, you better have graduated, you better
Yeah.
have your own perspective of life, you want certain things. So those are the things that are playing an important role in Mongolian women nowadays, why they don't want to get married and have children too early, because they're getting more ambitious, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that they don't want a family, but if you look at the numbers, the birth rate is kind of going down. So I don't know if it's personal choices, but if you look at the number, the demographics are definitely, we have higher women, and it was like one guy could have 3 or 4 girlfriends, and they were even joking like, "Hey, could we go to polygamy?" Right? There was a joke like, all these women are just gorgeous and beautiful. Could we have multiple wives? And like, as a joke, I wanted to say like, "Hey, you can't even handle one. How can you have four?" So this is one of the this is an issue because you have to
Mm.
fix it. Otherwise, what happens is your Mongolian woman would start marrying somebody else, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that, marrying someone else, because what we said earlier, you didn't actually comment on it, but what Jack Weatherford said, at least, that the Mongolian culture is so homogenous, it's so hard to actually become a Mongolian. Really, the only way to fix a demographic problem, apart from raising the birth rate, is raising immigration. So you've got Russia to your north, China to your south. I get the sense you're not going to want to be bringing either of them in anytime soon. What happens then in the future to solve the demographic issue? Does it affect the culture? Would you end up, maybe because there's a bunch of Australians, right? You've got a deep relationship with Australian mining. Just import a town of Australia, and we create the mix of the cultures. We create an Australian Mongolian lineage. They can be the next Khans.
Yeah. Well, we could look at immigration from historical and contemporary perspective, right? You look at Genghis Khan's era. Mongolia was like multi-racial. We had so many ethnic groups. You still have Hazaras in Afghanistan. They're saying, I'm Mongolian. You go to Turkey and they will say, oh, I'm half Mongolian, right? You go to Central Asia, they're saying, I'm half Mongolian. That type of thing, historically, we are non-homogeneous, right? But you look at modern Mongolia, is very, very homogeneous. But you do still have some mixed marriages, right? We've been under Manchu Qing for 200 years. So you have half Chinese bloods, right? You have some Russian Mongolian bloods. It depends on where, like which provinces you live in. But the idea of making Mongolia a salad bowl, right? What we say in the States is a mixing salad bowl, right? I would say it's quite raw right now because even if Mongolia recognizes that it has a democratic major issue, I don't think that is the way that the nation would go about. But now this is just my perspective. And not because Mongolia doesn't want any mixed race children, it's just that they're not ready. Developmental wise, culturally, we're very protective people. They don't even want mine. So why would some foreigner come in and start changing our
Definitely.
ethnic groups?
So that sense is really deep in the culture of Mongolia.
It is. And my family, so in Mongolian culture, you follow your father's side, right? I'm from Western Mongolia, so because I follow my father's side, and you have the Eastern Mongolia. Even we're all Mongolian, there's still that little, I'm from this province, you're from this province type of, what would you call it? They want to be better than one another.
Yeah,
okay?
it's
I'm
like
going to give you an
brotherly
example.
competitiveness.
So the northern people would say like, oh, the Gobi, like the desert people. Okay? Because you're north, you have the mountains. And then the Gobi people would say, oh, the mountain people. So those type of things. So until everyone accepts that you're just Mongolian, you're like people, it doesn't matter if you're from mountain or Gobi Desert or west or south. Until that's solved.
Are you a desert or a mountain person?
I'm Western Mongolia. I love the rivers.
So what is that? A river. You're a river person.
I would say I'm definitely a river person. Let me respond to the immigration question. Mongolia is pretty rough on immigration. Obviously Jack didn't get the passport. It's hard. And I don't know if it's because we want to stay homogenous, but I don't see solving demographics going to go towards bringing immigration. Yeah.
We've been talking for a while. There's really 2 or 3 more questions I'd like to ask. You got the time for it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can't talk about Mongolia without bringing up its giant southern neighbor. So, interesting detail about Inner Mongolia, which is a state in China, is that it has a higher ethnic population of Mongolians than Mongolia itself. So, talk about the relationship with China geopolitically, but then as well culturally.
Okay, so we're starting with Inner Mongolia and then China.
Wherever you want to go. The
Okay.
whole it's all in there.
Okay. In the literature of Mongolian history, you will find Inner Mongolia and Outer Mongolia. Ethnically, you're talking about the same people, right? You just separated. Inner is part of China, Outer Mongolia is outside of Mongolia. Historically, Inner Mongolians are counted as Mongolian ethnics if you discount the politics of it. Modern Mongolian population still sees Inner Mongolia as Mongolian. But if you ask them which country are they from, they would say China because Inner Mongolia is no longer Mongolian territory, right? The Mongolian government does not govern the Inner Mongolian people. But do they use same languages? Yes. Inner Mongolians are the highest number of Mongolian population on earth that still uses Mongolian traditional writing. Okay? Now, that plays an important role in maintaining Mongolian culture. So Inner Mongolians play an important role in continuing that language, that literature, right? So modern Mongolia, we have Cyrillic and the traditional. Right now, we use both. You take away the traditional one, the Inner Mongolians are the only Mongolian ethnic groups. So because Mongolia uses both Cyrillics and tradition, that makes Inner Mongolian Mongolian because they're part of the Mongolian culture and language and literature. Okay, this is one aspect. Culturally, they celebrate similar same holidays. So we have Summer Nadam. We have Mongolian New Year is usually it's like a month behind Chinese Lunar New Year's. So the cultural aspects are definitely there for one. Now you look at Inner Mongolia from the government's perspective, it's different because when Mongolia and China become diplomatic, when they establish diplomatic relations, as with any country, they sign saying we're not going to get involved in your domestic issues. Okay? So you look at Inner Mongolia, as I said earlier, the Mongolian government does not govern Inner Mongolia, even though they're ethnic, same people. The Chinese government governs Inner Mongolia. So with that said, the perspective from the Mongolian people towards Inner Mongolian, the government's policy toward Inner Mongolian are totally different. Okay, you can ask a civilian like me, ask about Inner Mongolian. I just told you, you ask somebody from the government about the Inner Mongolian policy, they would tell you Chinese policy. Because you're not talking about a certain population, you're talking about two countries' relations concerning Inner Mongolian and Uyghurs are exactly the same, right? Yeah.
And the broader cultural and geopolitical relationship with China, because I saw in the news a couple, well, at least maybe it was a year ago now, but there was a whole thing about the Chinese, the CCP, enforcing people in Inner Mongolia to not speak that language, not learn that language. This is obviously for a very proud cultural people of Mongolia, like a huge problem. So the sort of diplomatic relationship with China, the geopolitical relationship with China, talk about China.
Yes. So Mongolia-China relations are, I would say it's complicated. It requires a lot of diplomatic maneuvering, shall I say. But remember, guys, I'm a researcher. I'm not a diplomat. But there are so many things social things that Mongolia and China need to stay away from each other's issues. So, for example, when the CCP, now when I say China, there are so many different governments, administrations, Mongolia too. We could break it down into Hu Jintao and then Xi Jinping, or we could talk about Batulga, other former presidents, how they dealt with China. within 4 years, 8 years, etc., etc. But the overall relations between Mongolia and China has been around for over 200 years. Okay, so China is Mongolia's traditional neighbor. We call traditional neighbor China and Russia, right? We only have two traditional neighbors. So there are things um, that are, I don't want to say like they understood each other without saying things, right? But the people have the right to question. For example, when CCP passed the Mongolians, and it wasn't just Mongolians, they used the Uyghurs not to use their, language and cultural activities too, is that in a way that affected Inner Mongolians preserving their national identity, language. Okay, there were Mongolians were they actually protested in Washington D.C. There were people gathered around and protested the CCP's decision. But if you look at it from the Chinese perspective, China is just trying to strengthen or unify their people, right? Now, I don't know if they think Han race is stronger than Inner Mongolian or Uyghur. I don't know that aspect. But if the CCP is really saying everyone's Han, because they're not, right? We all know that. They are, China is also very, very diverse. So, in a way, I think they were making sure that everyone knew Mandarin Chinese versus saying everyone should be Han Chinese. But then you read reports from people who left China and really speaking out, looking for political asylum in Europe or in UK. They're saying that there is so much control towards those minority groups. So maybe the goal is something different than just learning a language. It's more of a simulation techniques, right? So you could look at it from that perspective and then how Mongolia responded, okay? Again, Mongolia has only two neighbors, so there are certain things that you can get involved in, but I think Inner Mongolian Uyghur stuff is out of the question because when you establish diplomatic relations on a government level, you said we're not going to get involved in domestic issues. So if Mongolia were to have a protest, the Mongolian government is expecting both China and Russia not to act because we're independent. We don't need your influence. We don't need your saying what we're going to do with our people or how to handle our protests, right? So in a way, it's kind of like win-win. But if you look at it from Western perspective, they're probably saying, Mongolian government, why aren't you saying anything? Inner Mongolians, your same people, part of your populations are being basically abused, forced off their culture and language, and now they're forced to speak a basically foreign language. But most Inner Mongolians are bilingual. They when they speak Mongolian, they have accent. They like I speak different Mongolian than Inner Mongolians. There are certain things that I have no idea what the fuck they're saying. Excuse me.
I think considering that you have these two, superpowers as neighbors and you're a little 3 million population country, you do punch so ridiculously high above your weight culturally. Obviously, Genghis Khan is a huge reason for that. But I found it interesting, like as a detail, that say South Korean or Japanese culture informed you more than say did Chinese or Russian. Like that sort of says a lot, doesn't it?
Yes, so it goes back to history and what Mongolians have learned throughout its history, right? They throughout different administration, the Manchus and Qings have always claimed that Outer Mongolia was kind of like Inner Mongolia. So that sentiment, those literature is kind of drilled into Mongolia. So everything you do is you don't want to be assimilated, right? It would be so easy to assimilate with Chinese or even South Korean or Japanese. I don't want to say culturally, but even like racially, right? But Europeans are different. you try to assimilate Mongolians with Russian, it's gonna take so many years, right? Much
Mm.
longer than you're assimilating Asians with Asians. Um, but I think from sovereignty and independence perspective for Mongolia, just 3.3 million, I think we have to protect our nationality.
Mm.
And we are different. We have a different history, we have different cultures, we have different languages. Um, so yeah.
All right, mate. Well, I think this has done justice to at least a little bit of an introduction to Mongolia. Talk a little bit about the book you're writing. What's what's it about?
So I started writing this book when I was pursuing my master's degree 3 years ago. It's part of my master's capstone. It's basically covers all of Mongolia's diplomatic history uh, within and international relations, activities such as regional and global wars and where Mongolia was. The book itself is intended to let the reader know that when these activities, when there's major events were happening, Mongolia was doing this, and we weren't just sitting still.
Cool.
Because Mongolia is a small state, we tend to get overlooked a lot. So I wanted to get it out there, show the world that there's Mongolia between Russia and China, but we were also internationally involved.
And when's that going to be published?
Oh, it's such a long process, and because of my experience, I'm getting a lot of help from, diplomats and some people who has been in the field for such a long time, so I don't sound like an idiot. So, but I'm hoping to get it published by this fall. So I'm close. I just need to do more work.
All right. Finally, these are two questions I try to ask every guest who comes on the podcast. The first of which being, what is a country that you're particularly bullish on?
I have to think about that one. I mean, if you look at it from international relations perspective, the world is such a bad place right now, and I'm in the States. I'm looking at it from kind of like a superpower perspective, but I think I think China would succeed.
Okay.
But again, I said I'm looking at it from superpower perspective, right? Um, China would succeed because they have the manpower, they have the economic ambition, they have so many people, so the work labor is there. But at the same time, they're not open. They're very authoritarian. So I don't know. Um,
Cool.
yeah.
I'm gonna.
Sorry if you weren't
Have you?
expecting me to say China, but but there is an issue. There's definitely so many issues, but I don't know if they're gonna get over it because it's too big. It's very big. They have a very big problem. Yeah.
Have you heard of a guy called Peter Zeihan?
No.
Okay. He is a geopolitical analyst who became quite famous this year.
Okay.
But I'll send you his name after. You can look him up. He would disagree with your outlook on China, and so it might be really interesting for you to see, why he's thinking that. I mean, if you can
Let's
hook up
go.
with a guy, it'd be amazing. He's in the US, and
Okay.
I personally I think like a really really interesting guy. Okay, final question.
Well, but the another thing is, like I said, you're looking at it from superpower perspective, but U.S. is still leading. I think
Yeah,
with
definitely.
military, it really depends on which area you're talking about. Like, U.S.
Mm,
will definitely lead militarily, technologically, like intellectual property wise. U.S. will lead, but that's why I
mm.
said China has so many problems, and I just don't know if they're gonna to open it up. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, absolutely none of us know, and
exactly,
you
exactly.
can't predict a future of infinite possibilities based off a finite experience of the past. There is
Yeah,
no we can only speak with degrees of confidence. So Peter Zeihan speaks with 100% confidence, which is maybe why he's such a compelling guy to listen to. But a little bit more humility might be nice. But yeah, interesting. Okay, Bolor, final question. If you could witness a conversation between any two people of history, dead or alive, no language barrier, so a podcast, who are you listening to?
I would listen to the three people that were during Yalta conference in 1945.
Okay.
I'm a stronger believer of that we don't know anything, because once you come to a certain position, you know everything, what's going on, and the decision changes, your perspective changes, kind of like presidents, right? I think presidents know way, way, way more. What they're saying is totally different than what they're telling the public. Whether it's paranoia or they don't trust how their citizens will react. So I would love to listen to Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt, what they were talking about in the small dark room, and they came out and
Wow.
took that picture, which changed the world.
Oh, that would
Yeah,
be unbelievable.
that would be unbelievable, and I want to know what they were really, really talking about.
All right. Well, I can't thank you enough for being so generous with your time and generous with your responses as well. Yeah, I have a huge soft spot for Mongolia, and I romanticize the idea of one day going there and buying a horse and just popping into people's gears along the way.
Sounds
Bringing off
amazing. Sounds
some
free.
milk. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
sounds free. I love it.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. I really enjoyed talking with you.